Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
If I said the Sultan of Swat, the Splendid Splinter, the Georgia Peach, or Stan the Man, you'd know exactly who I was talking about when it comes to naming a baseball player.
This is episode 11, and we're talking about baseball nicknames this week. We kind of just wanted to get together and discuss this because it was actually pretty interesting looking back through the ages at the number of them, because there was a lot of things I would have thought about how nicknames kind of came to be and how they have been there throughout the, baseball, the history of baseball. And I guess that's really not the case when you really look at least the numbers in some respects.
Yeah, I came into this thinking that the older nicknames were these hallowed nicknames like the ones I mentioned, and they for those times they were oftentimes named not by the players themselves but by the writers and people traveling with them. But as it turns out, there's a lot more nicknames after 1960 than I thought.
Oh, and I'm sure some of it is that many of the nicknames before 1960 have been lost to time, and there'll be minor players that weren't ever popular enough or big enough to get written enough about regularly to have that kind of legacy, and so their nicknames are lost to the ages, whereas we're just aware of the modern nicknames more because we're around now. But I certainly think there are also other definite reasons why you see more nicknames, or at least certainly why you saw a huge crop of them pop up during a particular period of time as we saw more expansion teams.
Yeah, and I think players are more sensitive about controlling their image. I think you've mentioned that as well. So it's a little, if you have one that isn't really positive, and there are some, you probably aren't going to do anything but try to put that one down and get rid of it.
Exactly. Yeah, players have a lot more say in what their nickname is, certainly.
So, there are names I feel like Cy Young, that's a nickname, and this for Cyclone. There are a lot of them that aren't all that interesting. I don't even think Phil Scooter Rizzuto is a particularly interesting nickname.
No, there's a lot of nicknames that are just like boring, I want to say. It's almost if I wonder if it was because it's the kind of guy that you talked about all the time because he was an important guy on the team, but he didn't have any kind of trait or easily, discernible thing about him. So they just ended up with, Scooter.
And they tried to put nicknames on guys at times, right, that they didn't really want. So Joe Medwick was known at times as Ducky Wucky. Okay, his teammates though, he was this big, strong guy, and they called him Muscle, so nobody would call him Ducky Wucky to his face.
That doesn't even sound like a real nickname.
They called him Ducky Medwick was his nickname. If you look back, you will see that was the name they used, and a very good player. I think he's a Hall of Fame player. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, and then they would try to give you a nickname like Rapid Robert Feller, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Rapid Robert, it's not that good,
especially because he goes by Bob.
He ended up going, or Jimmy Double X Fox. You'd write about Jimmy Fox, the Here Comes Double X.
And it's just it's especially weird because you were telling me about that. I'm like, it just doesn't sound good.
How about Yogi Berra?
I guess it's weird to think of that as a nickname.
Yeah, right, because it was always Yogi.
It was always Yogi.
Not Lawrence Peter Berra, as Yankee fans would tell you.
No, but yeah, he's just always been Yogi. So I guess you could say it's almost too good a nickname.
Right. So obviously, the Yankee Clipper, one of the great nicknames, right? Joltin' Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah.
Simon and Garfunkel calling him out in song. Those are great nicknames. But one of my favorite old nicknames was a pitcher for the Chicago Cubs, Mordecai Three Finger Brown.
Now, I'm hoping he didn't have three fingers because I would just make this better.
As a matter of fact, he lost the ends of two of his fingers, and he really had three fingers.
See, I feel like it would be better if it was just like, Mordecai Three Fingers. He had only four fingers on his left hand.
We're facing Three Finger Brown
today. If he had more or less than three, that would have made it even better.
No, that really was three fingers. So I think he's got a great name. Now you could get hung with a nickname, and I guess this guy was a pretty decent player way back in I think the 1906 World Series. It was a Bonehead Merkel.
That doesn't sound like a flattering.
It's the 1908 World Series. No. Bonehead Merkel, at the end of a game, was on the bases, and the winning run scores, and he didn't touch up at second. So they throw the ball into second. They tag the base. They call him out. Giants lose the game and lose the World Series.
And so they nickname him Bonehead
Merkel.
And then they just,
for the rest of his career, he gets this.
Man, that is rough. God. I guess it's different when like, yeah, it's just like, but that's like the writers did him dirty there.
So one of the things that I think is you should consider being a really good nickname where it stands alone, so not like a Yogi or whatnot. And so you know the guys come into the plate, and the announcer on the radio or TV is say, "Here comes the Say Hey Kid," and okay. Yeah, that really works. You know, here comes the Iron Horse.
Yeah, those are solid nicknames because they can exist on their own. Like, I guess a way to compare them would be like all of those Chris Berman nicknames where like it was more just either a pun or a joke using the name. Like if the nickname can't entirely exist without the player's name being said around it, it's not a great nickname.
Yeah, you know, Barry U.S. Bonds. Nobody ever called him Barry U.S. Bonds.
Right, and you certainly wouldn't just call him U.S. To me, that's the thing. Like the nickname.
No, that was basically from a singer named Gary U.S. Bonds, and it was his play on words that was just not very good.
But there was Mike Pepperoni Piazza.
Yeah,
and like so, like you would never call Mike Piazza pepperoni on its own. That just doesn't work.
Right.
So
right.
like to me, that's the problem with all those kinds of nicknames.
Yeah, I think you were saying it's like dad puns.
Yeah. Like, I'm fine with the nickname, but the nickname needs to be something like you kind of, that happened at the beginning of the show. And if you just say that name by itself, you know who you're talking about.
Not Jim Two Silhouettes on Deshays, you know, which, I remember it because it was just so outlandish.
The funny nickname, but it's
nothing
not,
that stuck for him.
It's not a great nickname.
As a player, certainly, you know.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And there were two Wainers we talked about in I think, episode 1 or 2, Paul and Lloyd Wainer, and one was called Big Poison and the other was called Little Poison. And I think that's a kind of a cool nickname to have had.
It is interesting kind of seeing throughout history how many different group nicknames have kind of popped up. There have been a whole bunch of like Big Three pitchers. There's Generation K for the Mets in the early 90s.
Right, you had the Big Three with the A's and the Big Three with the Braves. They were both called the Big Three. They were different three.
You had the Bash Brothers. You had groups of like certain Murderers Row for the Yankees with all of those guys.
That's a great point because teams got nicknames for the season they might have had. You know, the We Are Family season in 1979 for the Pittsburgh Pirates because they always played the song, you know, and the Gas House Gang for the Cardinals back in the 20s. I mean, those are kind of, storied nicknames of teams.
Team nicknames. So they certainly exist, but those are interesting because you almost only get those because of specific circumstances. You would never have a nickname born out of like where there's plenty of guys even back before the 60s that got their nickname because of the type of person they were and had little to do with actual baseball acumen.
Right. Like Ernie Mr. Sunshine Banks.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, and not that Ernie Banks was a bad player. He was a phenomenal player. But Mr. Sunshine had little to do with his baseball talent.
I do like from the Negro Leagues, Cool Papa Bell, James Cool Papa Bell. So, he, I guess, was a very fast player and known for it. So he tricked his roommate one time.
I think you told me this story.
By saying that, he was so fast that he could turn off the lights and get into bed before it was dark. And I could see him. I guess he knew it was a faulty light switch in the room. So so he turns the light switch off. He hops into bed. His roommate, he was amazed, that Cool Papa Bell was that fast. So
granted, I think he would have realized because it would have still not taken. It would have been like, that took a really long time for those lights to shut off.
So and there were guys whose name who didn't like their name. Another guy, Charlie King Kong Keller. And he just didn't like being called King Kong and tried everything he could to dissuade it. But in those days, In
those days, the thing is back then, the big difference is you had one writer that followed the team around. And so the relationship was just different. So the writer could pick up on a team nickname in a way that they might not pick up in today, where the writers are much more outside the locker room.
Well, and you're so right. And I think back we talked about in our Silver Screen podcast about the Nacho movie, and Robert Duvall in that movie played a writer who was trying to get the story of Roy Hobbs, and so he's following him around and doing investigation. He was really fast. Where did this guy come from? Or what? And so you had that kind of writers who had that kind of respect, where the players had to talk to them, and it was just you could give a guy a nickname, and Grantland Rice gave nicknames to two of the most famous major leaguers in history. Right, the first one is Honus Wagner, the Flying Dutchman.
Ooh,
okay, and Walter, the Big Train Johnson. He gave both of those nicknames.
And those are
two
iconic. Well, the Big Train more than the Flying Dutchman.
I think those are like original Hall of Famers, first class.
Yeah, but to give the Big Train his nickname certainly says something, and it's just like. It's just the difference. Writers aren't that way with the team anymore. so they're not able to necessarily just bestow a nickname on somebody.
Right, and you would get a name, and you'd go, well, okay, can I live up to that name? A name like a Home Run Baker, and Frank Baker, I think he hit just a few home runs back in the early part of the 20th century. He was not a tremendous home runner, but he had it in a playoff World Series, I think, and that's how he got the name Home Run Baker, even though he was not a home run hitter.
You're some young kid who comes up and has some super important play, and now you're stuck with some nickname that might not even be representative of your game.
So I'm a Dodger player. Everybody knows Pee Wee Reese. Was their shortstop for years, and was known among other things for being very supportive of Jackie Robinson when he came in the league. Pee Wee was a marbles champion, and apparently
marbles?
That's where he got the nickname Pee Wee. But today, I just can't imagine any major league ball player allowing his name, if it had no bearing on what it was, to be still called Pee Wee.
Didn't we have a Pee Wee Reese, like?
No. There is no other Pee Wee that I can think of.
Not like within last 20 years. I thought there was one like somewhat recently.
I don't know.
I thought he was a Red.
I don't. Pokey Reese.
Yeah, that's the okay.
Pokey Reese, and he wasn't a slow player, by the way. But
that's not
Pee Wee. Got the nickname right. It's not Pee Wee. They've nicknamed Cookie. The name Cookie was a name that you would use, and Cookie Lavagetto. And that's mildly interesting. Although there were two guys named Cookie that came through the major leagues. Goose Goslin. Okay, that's a pretty good name. About how he got it was that he looked like he ran like a bird flapping his wings, so it's not very positive.
Yeah, but that's usually how you get the other part of your nickname. You're either a great player or there's something really goofy about you.
And a guy who was an American Indian, Chief Bender, he really was a member of a tribe. His name was Chief Bender. His nickname was Chief Bender. And you think, today I'm not so sure that
that was his name.
Would work.
So
well, no, he was an Indian, and his name was Charles Albert Chief Bender, and he was referred to as Chief.
That's a little different.
Yeah. So I don't know if that would really. And Mickey Mantle had a nickname, and I didn't really. I think I listened to a lot of baseball names. Mickey, the Commerce Comet. He was from Oklahoma. Commerce Comet. Yeah. No, here comes the Commerce Comet. It just
doesn't sound good.
Doesn't sound right.
That's I think one of the issues with a lot of those more historical nicknames is they're just too long. They're all mouthfuls.
Well, how about another Hall of Fame shortstop, Luke Appling, known as Old Aches and Pains.
Like what the.
What kind of nickname is that?
He's like, what is he, like an old man, like struggling to get up in the morning?
Whitey Ford got the chairman of the board. That's pretty good.
That's a pretty good nickname. It's pretty tough to do better than that.
And then, of course, Shoeless Joe Jackson, right? Who got his name, I guess, because he had blisters on his feet in the game, took off his shoes, got up to the plate and got a hit and was slid into second base. And somebody said, "Look at you, shoeless son of a gun!"
And he's just Shoeless Joe Jackson.
Exactly. That's how he becomes shoeless. I don't think Ernie Lombardi liked being referred to as the Schnoz, although people did refer to him as the Schnoz.
That's a tough nickname.
I think my dad used to talk about him. He's a guy who's a fantastic hitter at the catcher position. Could get thrown out at first base from right field.
Ooh,
that's so slow. I know how he hit 300 means he had to be the greatest hitter you could
say
think
to
of.
Where they ain't, and they better not be close to first base.
And here's we talk about anachronistic nicknames, and you're gonna love this. So Hank, the Hebrew Hammer Greenberg.
It's a pretty good nickname.
The Hebrew
There was
Hammer.
a movie, nothing to do with this gentleman, but there was a movie. Yeah, I think it's
at the time.
At the time, it would be interesting, saying there's so many nicknames. We're saying I don't know if that would fly today. I don't know if that gets through. I feel like maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I think it would depend on the player.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in the context of the time that it was, I could see it. I think today, it would
depend. Were we calling Ike Davis that?
Yeah, it didn't work. By the way,
no,
it didn't work. So those are, I think the pre-1960 names that are really of interest.
It's just interesting. They're very different than I think a lot of the nicknames that we kind of saw started popping up after the fact. But I think that's because it was different in how they were handed out.
So, and I did neglected to mention Smokey Joe Wood, and it had nothing to do because other than he threw hard, which
threw smoke.
So yeah, the after. So you were mentioning that there's lots of big nicknames and classic ones like Mr. October.
Yep.
Okay, that's a good nickname
That's a
to have.
good
Okay, everybody
nickname.
knows who we're referring to, Reggie Jackson when we talk about that. And if I mention the Big Hurt,
Frank Thomas.
okay, so these are great nicknames. Now he's not pitching this year, but Thor. Okay, I don't know anybody else who's been called Thor before.
And he's talking about. We know that's Syndergaard. I think the key is also, so this is what ones have to transcend, like something that like a local radio announcer might use, or like a TV guy might use, because like some people always have like nicknames for everybody on the team, and like if it's something that only a fan of that team would know, I don't think that's really the nickname of the player.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, or doesn't carry as much weight. Certainly.
It doesn't carry as much weight, certainly.
Yeah, John Milner of the Mets was called the Hammer, which was weird because he was an average player, had a couple of good seasons. Hammer and Hank Aaron didn't really stick, and Bad Henry, which was what Don Drysdale named him because he was so good he was bad. Also, that just didn't really stick. So Hank Aaron, one of the greatest home run hunters, really doesn't have a nickname.
Not every amazing player gets a nickname. Like we were saying, like I don't think Barry Bonds really ever had a nickname. He was just Barry Bonds.
Right. Now, if I say the Rocket, okay, who am I talking about? Roger Clemens.
Okay. I
That's
don't.
a good nickname.
It is. It's just I don't know. It's not something I really that strongly associate with Clemens.
That's interesting.
Honest.
That's interesting. If I say Dr. K,
that's Dwight Gooden.
Okay. Well, you're a Met fan would know that. Now, a big guy who I thought was one of the great players of all time, Stretch, for the San Francisco Giants.
No, I've not heard of Stretch.
Well, boy, it was one of my real heroes when I was a little kid. Willie McCovey played with Willie Mays on the Giants, and Stretch hit the ball in the 1962 World Series that Bobby Richardson caught that ended the World Series on that play. They would have won it if it's a hit, and they lost it because
it was. You actually said the thing you made me think of this is like think of like another nickname that's kind of like that was the Big Unit.
Yes,
like.
Great nickname.
Great nickname. And it's like when you think about a lot of these after 60 nicknames, it's so interesting how kind of different they are. Where they are still. It's not about. It doesn't feel like these nicknames will come up to like deify the player as much. The Sultan of SWAT,
right?
The Iron Horse. Now it's like now the nicknames are much more like specific. It feels like to the guy.
Yeah. There were that's really good. I think there was more grandiose usage of the terms, more flowery language, perhaps at that time. And there was a player who was known by Junior, even though he was far from the only junior ever to play, and be a great player in the major leagues. And I don't know if he owns that name. If Ken Griffey Jr. is really the only junior.
I'm sure there have been other. I think that's where you get into some of like and the other thing is like how much of his junior a nickname when he's literally Ken Griffey Jr. Like he's already if he's already a junior, it makes it hard for like the nickname being junior isn't as special. The same way like Chipper's nickname being Chipper isn't as special when that's just what he goes by.
Yeah. You're not going to get me to say anything.
Like, and then you have ones that are self-given. Like you have Big Papi. Like that's a great nickname, but like Ortiz kind of gave it to himself.
That's right. I forgot that he gave it to himself. And I saw that Mark McGuire, Big Mac. I don't really.
I remember. I 100%.
Here comes Big Mac.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing.
You probably have Bill Clinton chasing him. Jimmy the Toy Cannon Wynn was one of my favorite nicknames growing up. This was a 5'8" guy who played in the Astrodome back in the '60s, and he was a home run hitter in a ballpark where it was really, really hard.
The Toy Cannon's a rough nickname. Like
no, a small guy with power.
Yeah, they're still getting called a toy.
I don't think Jimmy Wynn. He's still around. I don't think Jimmy Wynn will tell you he minds that nickname at all. People remember him.
Well, yeah, but you get that's why you're getting a nickname that's not necessarily the most flattering, like being called the Mad Hungarian.
Oh, that's a great nickname for a really good pitcher
who we have talked about before on this program.
Al Hrabosky.
It's a very. I don't know. That's not a nickname. That's I think I would love to have.
Well, and Willie Stargell, and it's Wilver Stargell is his name, went by Pops because I guess they won the World Series, as I mentioned, in 1979, and he was one of the older players. So it's okay to be called Pops when you're 40. It's probably not so good if you were 28.
Well, what if you're Gary Kid Carter?
He was called Kid all the way.
Exactly. You get Kid all the way.
Yeah. That's a great nickname, by the way. You say the Kid. And there was a bull, Greg Luzinski, who played for the Phillies, and there's also the Baby Bull. So it's interesting that the Baby Bull preceded the Bull, and the Baby Bull was Orlando Cepeda. Another guy who has Hall of Fame credentials, who I think should get a second look if he is.
And then you get some that are just like, this is one where I think it's interesting because it almost in a way violates our rule from before with the Chris Berman rule. But there's Ozzy, the Wizard of Oz Smith.
Yeah,
it almost kind of like we were slamming on it before, and here we are kind of going like, that's a great nickname, but it works so well. But he was also that's one where it's born out of more than just a play on his name.
Right. He was a player that was the Wizard of Ozzy. Every night he would go out and make a spectacular play.
Exactly. Yeah. So for him, it works a little bit more than somebody it's just a joke about his name. There was a component of that nickname that referred to his gameplay as well.
So uninteresting nicknames like Mookie, right? The Mookie Wilson of the Mets and now Mookie Betts of the Dodgers. I don't really think that's all. I don't
think that's all that interesting.
How about Charlie Hustle though?
I don't care for that nickname.
You don't like it? Meant a lot.
It doesn't sound good.
The guy who ran to first base on a base on balls every time. That's sort of one of the things that got him that nickname.
Yeah, I get it, but it's just like Charlie Hustle it's just such a weird nickname. I'm sorry.
Now, if you remember you don't, but you know about the '86 World Series, the Red Sox had a pitcher on that team that pitched with the Rocket, and this guy was Dennis Oil Can Boyd.
Again, like Oil Can.
Pretty good name. That's old school.
See, but even then, there's some of the new school ones that make me go, like Todd. Like, again, this is one I think, I'm not sure how much I love this one, the Todd Father. I feel like that's one that I've never really escaped Mets-specific fandom.
I don't like that at all.
But then there's ones like Joey Bats and Kung Fu Panda. Like, I don't know how Joey Bats I think is a really good one.
Me too.
I'm less sold on Pablo Sandoval's.
Well, it's almost like and I think I did come up with one of the ones that I think Chris Berman came up with, Fred Crime Dog McGriff. There was a Crime Dog commercial back in the day.
McGruff the Crime Dog.
Yeah, right. And so I think that's a Chris Berman. So I actually slipped in there, and I apologize for that. And there are two guys that are named Pudge. Both of them are in the Hall of Fame, but people, I guess, don't always think of them both being named Pudge. And you know them as...
I know Ivan Rodriguez.
Okay, so Carlton Fisk was also known as Pudge, and I'm surprised at how many people don't remember that. I did look it up.
Well, again, I feel like it's certainly people my age aren't going to remember that just because if you're going to say Pudge to them, they're going to think Ivan Rodriguez. So, the name's already in their head as something else.
A player that you didn't see play, and I did, who walked like a penguin, was nicknamed the Penguin, Ron Say. And you would think that he would have done everything he could to stop that nickname from being, but I think he still got that nickname today.
Mm-hmm. I think with nicknames in general, it's just mostly about like, is it something, how did the nickname come to be? Like, is it something that's making the player lionizing them, making them seem bigger, or is it something that's playing into and also players are a lot more savvy to them now because it's part of your branding. Like, let's put it this way. Jamal Adams didn't nickname himself Prez for no reason whatsoever.
Right.
So, like, they're paying attention to it now. So that's just going to inherently change how they are. Because you might go with a less flattering nickname. It's a very marketable concept. Like, if the Mad Hungarian existed today, I would totally be cashing on that and selling T-shirts.
I wanted to not forget to mention three guys who played on the same team who had kind of unusual nicknames, and that would be the 71As just before they won the World Series 3 years in a row. Jim Catfish Hunter, Hall of Fame pitcher. Mm-hmm. John Blue Moon Odom, and Jim Mudcat Grant. These are all pitchers on the same staff.
It's like some weird outdoorsy, like, let's go fishing, like, nickname convention.
I think Mudcat Grant left the team the next year, but Vida Blue joined the team certainly thereafter. So there was something with those A's teams and their bizarre names. I also remember the Human Rain Delay. So I
remember him as Steve Traxel.
Well, you're right. And as a pitcher, there was nobody who worked. You'd watch Steve Traxel pitch and you say, throw it.
Please throw the baseball.
So Mike Hargrove had all these histrionics he'd do when he'd come up to the plate. He'd adjust his shirt and move his hat around and so on and so forth, such that he got the nickname the Human. Not because he was a great hitter. I think he was a manager in the major leagues later on, too.
Yeah, I think it's just with nicknames, it's going to be interesting to see because I think as we're moving into the future, we're seeing just less and less of them. And I think it's going to be something that because players are so able to control their own personal brand so much more now, that nicknames are going to... I'm almost afraid they're going to be a more corporate thing in a sense. Players are going to approve them and make sure that the one they like is the one that's getting pushed.
So what you're saying is that the player is going to create his own nickname?
To a degree. The fans will still be the ones that help bestow it and help it catch on. But the player is going to be working a lot harder to make sure if they have one in particular they want to catch on, it'll catch on, which is why I don't think you've seen any catch on for, say, like Pete Alonso.
No, they try with the polar bear, but it's really not,
And none of the ones they've tried for him have really stuck yet, but they're looking still.
And you have to be a good enough player, to really.
You have to still earn the nickname in some way,
right?
Whether through fair play or folly.
You mentioned Fraser, Joey Bats, and Kung Fu Panda. The only other guy that's active that's got a nickname is Cespedes, who they call La Potencia, which means the power, which is great. But that's it for today's active players. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a trend you're going to see more and more of. Maybe you'll start seeing it bounce back further and further as players get back on the social media and start reclaiming it for themselves. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at AlmostCoop.